Okay, let's start with an introduction. Good afternoon. So these days, many online platforms intermediary operate as marketplaces that enable trades between buyers and sellers. Examples include online marketplaces such as Amazon, eBay, Taobao, software platforms, and video game consoles. On top of enabling trades, these platforms also actively intervene in their marketplace. Platform regulates the users through setting certain rules on their behavior. And I will call such rule settings as governance design decisions. For example, you can think about decisions regarding number of sellers, recommendation algorithm, or search interface and quality control. Such governance roles by platforms, especially those dominant one, has been highlighted in a series of policy reports. Here I quote the Kramer report. Platforms impose rules and institutions that shapes the functioning of the marketplace and determine the way in which competition takes place on the platform. They have a responsibility to ensure that competition on their platform is fair, unbiased, and pro-users. Now, they have a responsibility, but do they have an incentive to do so? Probably not, right? So, my main research questions are, in what way does the platform's choice of governance design differ from the welfare maximizing design? And what drives the possible distortions? So this general research question may sound a bit too broad. If we map them to our specific examples, then it becomes something like, is the number of sellers admitted by the platform too low? Is the recommendation algorithm too biased towards certain attributes? Is the search friction induced by the interface design too high? In this paper, I try to develop a framework to understand these questions. Now, how should we think about these questions? So let me briefly walk you through the thought process behind my modeling. When we talk about governance issues in classic non-platform settings, then we have some classical I/O models that typically look something like this. There's a market with trades between buyers and sellers of firms, and these sellers of firms, they compete with each other. Then typically you have a social planner or regulator that oversee the whole thing. And this model usually do some comparative statistics with respect to number of sellers, varieties, information environment, search friction, or quality standard. If we move to a platform setting, then things are pretty much the same, except that here we have a profit maximizing platform, and all these things are now chosen endogenously by the platform as part of the governance design. Given the similarity, then a natural question is there a common theme to this existing I/O model so that we can directly apply their insights to a platform setting? And the answer is yes. We notice that each of these design decisions affects two things. First, how much gross value is generated from transactions. And second, the design also affects the intensity of on-platform seller competition, which can be measured by seller markup. As a simple example, if we have a design that leads to more sellers, then provided that all these sellers are differentiated, then you will have more variety, which increase the value from transaction. But at the same time, when you have more sellers, then that will intensify the competition, which drives down the seller markup. More generally, this simple formulation based on value and markup is fairly flexible and summarizes the effect of various other design decisions on on-platform interactions. Based on this idea, I developed my theoretical framework. In the framework, there's a platform that enables transactions between buyers and sellers. The platform sets the governance design and fee level. The main part of the analysis compares the profit maximizing design and the welfare maximizing design. Here's a highlight of my main result. I identify a class of model where we can precisely relate the sign of welfare distortion, by which I mean the comparison between these profit maximizing design and welfare maximizing design with 3 instruments or business model of the platform, by which I mean the way the platform makes money. For example, some platforms charges transaction fees, some platforms charge participation fees or two-part tariff, or some platforms, they have other form of revenue generation, such as external advertising revenue. So the main point here is the comparison between these two things heavily depends on the way the platform makes money. So here's the outline of my talk. I will first go through 2 primary examples to illustrate the model to you. And then I will talk about main results, extensions. After that, I will have some discussion on some stylized facts that are consistent with the main results. And finally, I will conclude with my contribution to the literature. Okay, so here's the first example. Consider the classic Salot circular city model. Recall that in this model, there's a continuum of unit demand buyers. They are located on the circumference of a circle. And there are end sellers who are symmetric. If a buyer buys a product from seller I, then the utility he will get is the intrinsic utility minus the pace mismatch cost, or in typical terminology, this is the transportation cost, minus the price. So here the transportation cost component is basically the horizontal differentiation. Now let's add a platform to Salot circular city model. Among all end sellers, only n minus a of them are allowed to sell on the platform. And this is controlled by the platform. Forward, you will get equilibrium price. You will get equilibrium price that takes the form of cost plus markup. And you notice that this markup is decreasing in the number of sellers. Given this price and the number of sellers, the ex ante expected utility the buyer will get is given by this expression. Here, this is the ex ante expected mismatch cost minus price. I think I lost my connection, right?
Yeah. Can you share your screen again?
Okay. Okay, so I think we were at here, right? So given the price and the number of sellers, then the ex ante expected utility that the buyer is going to get is this thing. And we can label this part that is independent of price as V. So think of it as gross value. We will assume that buyers incur an intrinsic visiting cost D, which is IID drawn with some distribution function. Then we know that buyers have unit demand. And so the volume of transactions is simply the mass of buyers who participate on the platform or visit the platform, which is this mass. So we'll label the total volume of transactions as this Q, which is increasing in this value minus price. In this setup, then the main question is, how does the profit maximizing number of sellers compare with the welfare maximizing number of sellers? And the answer of that is going to depend on the fee instrument of the platform. Now you see that there are a lot of ingredients here, but the main things here are the markup M and the value V. In particular, I want you to notice that this M function and V function, they move in the opposite direction. When the number of sellers decreases, then that will relax the price competition, which increase the markup, but that will lead to fewer variety. So value and markup move in opposite direction in this example. Now let's consider another example where they move in the same direction. So this is an information design example. Consider the setup that is the same as the previous example, but instead of choosing the number of sellers, the platform chooses the information environment. There are two sellers, then buyers do not observe the mismatch value, X1 and X2. So you can think about the case where they don't understand the product attributes and they rely on platform recommendation to make their decision. Specifically, platform choose an information structure parameterized by A, which is between 0 and 1. Then each buyer who visits the platform will receive a signal S on this mismatch value. With probability A, this signal is perfectly informative and equals to the true value. With the remaining probability, this signal is a pure random noise independently drawn from a uniform distribution. So this is the so-called truth or noise signal structure, which is fairly straightforward. Based on this, then once the buyer receives the signal, then he will use Bayesian updating to form a conditional expectation regarding his mismatch value. So this is the Bayesian updating. And given this, the expected utility the buyer is going to get from buying product 1 is this expression here. Okay, so this is the same as what we had before, except that the mismatch value is now the conditional expectation. Once we have this, then solving for the model is fairly straightforward. You'll get symmetric equilibrium price that takes the forms of cost plus markup, where markup equals to this, and you will get ex ante gross surplus, the V function we mentioned just now, that takes the following form. I want you to notice that this value and markup, they are both increasing in the informativeness of the signal. The idea here is that when there's more informativeness, it sort of amplifies the perceived product differentiation. And that will increase the markup earned by the sellers because that relaxes the competition, more differentiation. And that will lead to higher value from transactions because buyers are more informed. They are able to get a better match value from that decision. So value and markup move in the same direction in this example. Inspired by these two examples, then here's how we write down our model. There's a platform, a continuum of unit demand buyers, and multiple sellers, which can be finite or continuum. The platform chooses its governance design, which is parameterized as a continuous variable A, from the set of all possible design, which is theta. To make things clear, I will just assume that everything is continuous, and theta here is a single dimensional compact set. However, the results I have can easily be generalized to the case where this A is a discrete variable and this theta is some sort of multi-dimensional design space. Okay, the results can be easily generalized. The design affects two things. Like I mentioned just now, design affects value from transactions and the seller markup from on-platform competition. For simplicity, we will assume that the platform has zero marginal cost and zero fixed costs. Now, given that this variable A is arbitrary, it is without loss of generality to reorder them so that this markup is increasing. So a higher A corresponds to a design that leads to a higher markup. Then similar to what we have earlier, we will just write down that seller pricing equals to cost plus markup. Here, we allow this value function to be non-monotone, but in various places, it is useful to highlight two special cases. One is the case where value and markup are negatively associated. In other words, V function is monotone decreasing. So this corresponds to our first example on choosing number of sellers. The second special case is where value and markup are positively associated or V increasing. So that would be our second example of information design. Now let's talk about buyers. Each buyer pays an intrinsic visiting cost D to visit the platform. We'll assume that each of the buyer, they have a unique demand, and we assume that the market is conditionally exposed covered. So what we mean by this conditional exposed cover is each buyer who visits the platform will eventually buy exactly one of the product. Given these two assumptions, then the transaction volume faced by the platform is simply the mass of participating buyers. So it is given by this expression, where this Q is increasing, continuous, and has a continuous derivative, and is log concave. We are going to analyze this framework under various given fee instruments. And to wrap things up, here's the timing. The platform sets the fee level and governance design. Sellers and buyers observe this thing and participate simultaneously. And then the on-platform interaction unfolds according to micro foundation, which can be summarized by the value and markup. So before going into the main results, I think this is a good point to pause for questions. Okay, so if there's no question, then I will move on. So I will talk about main result. To build out some intuition, we will first look at the simplest case of exogenous fee level. Apart from building up intuition, this section may be useful if fee levels are determined by some unmodeled institutional constraint or bargaining process. Okay, suppose that the platform charge constant per transaction fee, tau, on sellers. Now, because this additional fee is just a marginal cost to the sellers, so we can change our equilibrium price equation written down just now as this price equals to effective marginal cost plus markup. And given this, platform profit is simply transaction fee multiplied by the total number of transactions. From here, it is straightforward to see that the profit maximizing design simply maximizes the item inside here, or in other words, it will maximize the difference between value and markup. And one thing to note here is, because it maximizes the component inside, so it also maximizes the transaction volume. Now let's look at the welfare function. The welfare function we have is an unweighted sum of platform profit, seller's profit, and buyer surplus, where here we have integration of demand function from zero demand up to the marginal demand. Okay, a quick comment here is welfare function here indicates total efficiency. In some scenarios, one may want to emphasize a bit more on buyer surplus. So to do that, you can just add a coefficient here, and the result basically stays the same. Our welfare maximizing benchmark is the design that maximizes this welfare function. So we want to compare this welfare benchmark with the profit maximizing benchmark. Now this is fairly straightforward. We see that the profit maximizing design maximizes this VA minus P. So it maximizes all the rate components here, except this markup. So it is fairly straightforward that the profit maximizing design corresponds to markup level that is too low than the welfare benchmark. Now, in some cases, you notice that we have weak inequality here. So in some cases, we may have equality. So let's try to unpack this result and think through the intuition by going back to our examples. Now we know that profit maximizing design wants to maximize value and minimize markup. Likewise, the welfare benchmark wants to do the same, as decreasing markup would reduce take rate losses and increasing value is obviously good. So both objectives want to maximize value and minimize markup. If we go back to our example 1, number of sellers, then when you have more sellers, it increases the value and decreases the markup. So things are fairly aligned with our objective. So if we plot the welfare function and profit function as a function of number of sellers, then you can see that both of them are increasing in the number of sellers. This is because there's no trade-off. So both benchmark will go for the highest possible number of sellers, and we have no distortion in this case. Now, however, if we go to the example 2 information design, then something interesting happened. Recall that in this example, when you have a more informative signal structure, that it facilitates product match, which increase the value, but it also relaxes competition, which increase markup. So when you try to increase informativeness, then there's an implicit cost of a higher markup or a higher price. So there's a trade-off between informativeness and the price level. So when you write down the welfare function and you maximize it, then in general, you are going to get a non-monotone function, and you will have a welfare maximizing design that is an interior solution. However, this implicit cost of a higher price is greater from the platform perspective. Why is it the case? Because it focuses on maximizing volume. It does not internalize seller profit. And so this implicit cost is kind of amplified from its perspective. And so it is reluctant to choose a high informativeness. And you can see here that the profit function is decreasing in the informativeness. And so the platform will choose the lowest possible level of informativeness. So if we compare the welfare maximizing design and the profit maximizing design, then we see that the profit maximizing design is too uninformative. Okay, now let's move on to the case of proportional fee. Proportional fee R is between 0 and 1. For each unit of revenue, platform takes this PR, and sellers take the remaining portion, P multiplied by 1 minus R. In this case, we can write down the seller's sales margin as this expression. This 1 minus R is exogenous from seller's point of view. So sellers basically behave as if their marginal cost is this C over 1 minus R, which is higher than the original marginal cost. So based on this, then we can write down the equilibrium price as price equals to effective marginal cost plus markup. Then platform maximizes profit function, which is given by this per transaction revenue multiplied by the total number of transactions. If we substitute this price equation into the profit function and expand it, then you can split it into two components. The first component here is proportional to seller surplus. And the second component here is the volume of transactions. So this means that we can loosely interpret platform profit function as a weighted sum between as a weighted sum of proportional fees, as a weighted sum of seller surplus and volume of transactions, whereby the relative weight depends on cost, and as you will see later, depends on the elasticity of this aggregate demand. Now, one thing I want to highlight here is compared to the previous case of transaction fee, we have a new component here that is proportional to seller surplus. So this provides an incentive for the platform to sustain seller markup or price. Here's the formal result of proportional fee. The first stated condition here will hold when this Q over Q prime is large. A high Q over Q prime means that the transaction volume is less elastic. Okay, if you are familiar with pricing, then you know that this Q over Q prime is what we call inverse semi-elasticity. So the condition here will hold when seller marginal cost is small or the transaction volume is relatively inelastic. And in this case, from the intuition we have just now, we know that platform is skewed towards seller surplus. And so the profit maximizing design will be distorted towards a markup level that is higher than the welfare maximizing level. Okay, and conversely, if the marginal cost is high or the transaction volume is relatively elastic, then platform's profit is skewed towards volume. And we will get something like a proposition 1, whereby the profit maximizing design is skewed towards markup level that is too low, as indicated as the third bullet point here. Now, how do we understand these results? So let's go back to our examples again. Recall that in our example 1, number of sellers, then welfare, want to choose the highest possible number of sellers. So here I plot the number of sellers displayed and marginal costs over here. And we see that the welfare maximizing number of sellers is the highest possible level, which we will assume to be 10 here for simplicity. Now, for a profit point of view, then when marginal cost is small, platform wants to maintain seller markup. So it will choose insufficient number of sellers as indicated here. This is lower than the welfare maximizing level. And as cost increases, then the platform's profit start to shift towards the volume. And so it has a less incentive to maintain markup. And eventually we reach the case where there's no distortion. Okay, so once cost is sufficiently high, the welfare maximizing design coincides with the profit maximizing design. Now let's go to information design. Recall that in this case, from the welfare perspective, raising informativeness has an implicit cost of higher markup. So generally, you will have welfare maximizing design that is between 0 and 1, which is interior. Okay, so recall that we are plotting the welfare maximizing design in terms of the informativeness of signal as a function of cost. Now let's introduce the profit maximizing design. Recall that when cost is small, platform wants to protect seller profit. And so this higher markup from the platform's perspective is an implicit gain rather than an implicit cost. And so it will choose a design that is too informative and leads to insufficient seller competition. As indicated here, it is too informative relative to the blue welfare benchmark. Now, when you increase the cost, then the platform will start to have an incentive to reduce markup. So you can see that the informativeness decreases and eventually it becomes too uninformative relative to the welfare benchmark. Okay, so I think this is another good point to stop if there's any question.
Tao, can you just explain again the result in the transaction fee? So where you have this non-monotonic welfare and this decreasing profit function.
Increasing per transaction fee.
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
This one. Okay.
Yeah. So what is the? Oh, okay. So the horizontal axis is the signal.
Yes.
So why the profit is maximized at the minimum information?
Oh, okay. So this is, I would say this is an artifact of the specific numerical examples I have. But the main idea here is when you try to maximize the profit function, the optimal informativeness is going to be lower than the welfare maximizing informativeness. And the key idea is this implicit cost, whereby from the platform perspective, it does not take into account the seller profit, and so it is reluctant to choose this informativeness level that's too high.
Right. And also, do you assume anything like how does A affect V? So A always increase V. Is that an assumption, or it's not the assumption you make?
Okay, so I guess it would be useful to go back to the setup. Okay, so M markup is always increasing. We allow V to be non-monotone, but
Okay.
in the information example, which is example 2, then it is increasing.
Right. I see. Right. And here, and also here, I guess that you have it's a sort of IO market. So you only have the seller side competition, and the buyers are just buyers. There's no externalities among buyers. And does your model have anything to say when there is sort of buyer side some externality, or like
some sort of
like a
congestion?
bashing market?
Yeah, so I guess my model can't really say on that because it focuses on typical IO model.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's good.
Okay. So
is there any other questions?
Tat-How,
hi.
So I think can you go back to the previous slide? So you have this two examples. One is positively correlated. The other is negatively correlated. So do you have kind of another example that is in general is non-monotonic? So I think the example you're given, they are all monotonic, right? Either increasing or decreasing. So I'm just wondering, you have examples that's non-monotonic? Is that?
Okay, so in earlier version of the paper, which I did not include, I consider quality control. So when you have quality control, then there are actually 3 effects. So one is when you have a higher quality control, that reduce the number of sellers, which relax the competition. So so that will affect the markup. But at the same time, when you have a higher quality control, then fewer sellers means fewer variety. So there's a variety effect. Increased quality control, then that will increase the average quality of the goods. So there's a quality effect. So depending on how this variety effect interact with the quality effect, then value can be non-monotone. Okay, because value will consist of 2 parts, variety and quality. So they move in different directions. So depending on which one dominates, then it can be non-monotone.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Okay, if there's no other questions, so let me move on. Okay, so just now we are talking about this proportional fees. So now let's move on to the case where we have endogenous fee level. I will talk about per transaction fees, proportional fees, and then talk about lump sum fees, 2-part tariff, and other forms of revenue. Now, because fee levels is endogenous here, so the welfare benchmark we will be using is second best. Okay, in other words, it is welfare maximization subject to endogenous fee response by the platform. Now, per transaction fees and proportional fee, although in this case, it will be more complicated, but you will kind of get a similar result as before. So to save your time, I will skip them and we'll jump straight to the lump sum fee. Now, what's the motivation of lump sum fee? Sometimes due to technical constraints, platforms cannot reliably monitor transactions. And in those cases, the platform may want to charge pure lump sum fee on each sellers. And it could be something like participation fees, per item listing fee, or some per click fees. More generally, it would be any fees that is not contingent on transactions. This case is the easiest to understand when sellers are ex-ante symmetric. In this case, it is easy to see that the platform does best by setting this design to maximize seller surplus, and then use the lump sum fee to fully extract it. So profit function equals to the seller surplus. And in this case, we see that the platform is going to choose a design that leads to insufficient seller competition because it wants to protect their surplus. Formally, we have this result which says that the profit maximizing design leads to a markup level that is higher than the welfare maximizing design. Now let's combine everything that we have discussed just now, which is two-part tariff. So the platform can charge sellers a two-part tariff, which consists of lump sum fee plus a transaction-based fee component. In other words, for each transaction at price P, then platform takes a per unit fee plus a proportional fee component. Okay, so we combine everything in the most general form. Now here's the important thing. I will impose what I call a no net subsidy constraint, meaning that the transaction fee collected by the platform cannot be negative. Okay, the idea is that such a subsidy is rare in practice, and sellers could exploit the subsidy by fraudulently replicate transactions. Okay, so we will impose this constraint. With two-part tariff, then you will see that platform's profit, in most cases, it will look like a vertically integrated monopolist. So the best thing to do is to just choose the design to maximize the value V here in the profit function, and then use the fee to implement the standard monopolist price given by this. Now, here's the exception. When the no net subsidy constraint binds, then this strategy does not work. And this happens when this inequality here holds. In this case, the profit maximizing platform will have to charge zero transaction fee, and its profit becomes as if it charges only lump sum fee. And so we can apply the results from the previous case, and we can see that the platform will choose its design to maximize seller surplus. So from here, you can see that the result is going to depend on whether this no net subsidy constraint kicks in or not. And formally, we have this result. Suppose V has the value has a unique maximizer. If seller marginal cost is low, then the no subsidy constraint does not bind, and we will have no distortion in this case. However, if marginal cost is high such that the no subsidy constraint kicks in, then the profit maximizing design will correspond to markup level that is too high relative to the welfare benchmark. Again, if we go back to our example 2 information design, then we see that if cost is small, then the profit maximizing design and the welfare maximizing design coincides. Okay, so that's the first part of the statement. And as C increases, over here as C increases, then we see that the profit maximizing design or the informativeness start to diverge with the welfare maximizing design, and it is too informative. Okay, too informative, or in other words, it corresponds to insufficient seller competition. Okay, this is the last slide for the main results. So far we only consider some sort of fees. We can consider some other forms of revenue. Some platforms rely on external advertising revenue. A typical model of that would assume that the platform chooses the number of ads, which is seen as nuisance to buyers. And then the per piece revenue rate of the advertisement is given by this R function, which is increasing in the volume of transactions, or if you want, it would be like the traffic of the platform. Okay, and we assume that this R is determined by a competitive ad sector, and so this R function is exogenous from platform's point of view. Given this, we can write down the profit function as the amount of ads multiplied by the per piece revenue rate, and this per piece revenue rate increases with the volume. looking at this function, you can see that it's analogous to per transaction fee model. So we can directly apply the result there, whereby the platform, remember, it focused too much on the volume, and that will be the source of distortion. Some platforms charge buyer some form of participation fee in the form of like device sales. And recall that we have this, we interpret part of the possible interpretation of total transaction volume is the mass of participating buyers, right? So we can write out a profit function as the fee multiplied by the mass of buyers. And so that would be equivalent to the per transaction fee model. And again, the result there is applicable. Finally, you can think about two-sided fees, try to combine everything again, and it will be equivalent to our two-part tariff models. Now we went through a lot of stuff, so let me quickly wrap things up. We have analyzed a lot of fee instruments, and generally we can categorize them into two broad categories. On the one hand, we have this volume-aligned fee instruments. Examples here are per transaction fees, external advertising revenue, buyer participation fees, and proportional fees when seller marginal cost is high. In this case, we see that there will be no distortion where value and markup are negatively associated. So an example of that would be number of sellers. So more sellers, lower markup, lower volume, higher value. In contrast, where value and markup are positively associated or non-monotone, then you will get a distortion whereby the markup level is too low. Example of that would be information design. Next, we have seller-aligned fee instruments. Examples of that are seller lump sum fees, two-part tariffs, and proportional fees with low marginal costs. For this kind of instruments, then the platform focuses on seller profit or seller surplus. And we will get distortions whereby the markup induced by the platform's profit maximizing design has a markup level that is too high, regardless of the association between value and markup. Okay, again, I think this is a good point to stop. So how many more minutes do I have?
You still have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 to 12 maybe.
Okay.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes, please.
I remember that you, when you set up the model, you assume that the buyers are exposed, coveted. So conditional they visit the platform, they must purchase from it. Like, how does that assumption affect those results? Because I can remember the governance choice of the platform will depend on that assumption.
Yes, exactly. So that simplifies the analysis because it allows us to have this Q function, which is kind of depends on the single argument, which is the net utility provided to the buyer. So that simplifies a lot of stuff. If we have like what you suggest, maybe it is not exposed covered, then this Q function would be different. And the result is going to depend on the assumptions we put on this Q function. So if you assume some sort of correlation between these two inputs, so in that case, the Q function is going to be a multi-argument function. So in that case, things is going to depend on the correlation between different things. So I don't have a general results on that.
Okay.
Hello, I have a question.
Yes.
So when you are talking about the indulgence fees, you are assuming that the markup is always independent of the fee, right?
Yes, correct. That follows from the full pass-through property. So because the market is fully covered, then the cost pass-through is going to be 1.
Is there any concern about the seller's participation constraint?
Seller participation constraint on, like you're mentioning the case of transaction fees?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think I should have mentioned that. So implicit assumption here is the fee is such that the sellers are still earning positive profit, and so they are willing to participate. Okay, so in other words, in the pure transaction fees model, then it is implicitly assumed that sellers always participate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if there's no questions, then let's move on to, I will talk about some extensions, and then I will discuss some stylized fact and conclude. So far we only analyzed the case of a single dimensional and continuous variable. So in some cases, then you can think of the platforms as choosing design decisions that is like a set of rules or simultaneously changing multiple designs. And that would be something like a discrete choice, and the design would be a multi-dimensional decision. But the result can be easily extended to that case. The way we do that is to exploit the correspondence between the design and the outcome. So instead of directly working with the variable A, we can just work with the pair of outcome V and M, and the results will flow through. Next, for simplicity, we have assumed costless governance design. However, for examples such as quality control, then imposing a stricter quality control may require some costs. So I have an extension of that, whereby I assume that the platform has a fixed cost, K, which is increasing in the value generated. And in that case, it will introduce a new source of distortion because the platform, so to speak, does not fully internalize the value of its investment. Okay, so that will introduce a new source of distortion. And this distortion that comes from the fixed cost can offset or strengthen the existing distortion I talked about just now, depending on the parameters. The main part of the analysis exogenously impose the fee instrument that is available to the platform. The rationale here is that the fee instrument choice may reflect some institutional consideration. For example, like I mentioned just now, the platform may have difficulty in monitoring transactions, so it cannot charge transaction fees. Or if the platform is facing some chicken and egg launching problem, then a participation fee component might not be feasible. Nonetheless, if we try to endogenize the choice of fee instrument, then some form of two-part tariff is optimal in this setup. And we can show that the profit maximizing design will be distorted towards markup level that's too low, which is consistent with what we had earlier. Finally, so far we only consider unweighted welfare benchmark, but some jurisdictions may want to put a greater emphasis on consumer surplus. We can easily allow for that by assigning a weight lambda on consumer surplus in the welfare function, and similar result will continue to hold. Okay, so let's talk through some stylized fact. Let's return to our example 1, number of sellers. Recall that our theoretical result suggests that if the platform is using seller-aligned fee instrument, then its choice of number of sellers may be too low. To illustrate the result, consider video game platforms such as Sony PS4 and Microsoft. This platform generate most of their profit through two-part tariff, which consists of a development kit fees and per game licensing payment. Recall that two-part tariff, according to our categorization, is seller aligned. And consistent with our prediction here, this paper report that these platforms indeed restrict access to selected sets of game developer to avoid intensive price competition. Example 2, information design. In practice, a platform can implement its information design through its recommendation algorithm. So you can think of our example 2 as a stylized model that captures the trade-off of algorithm between emphasizing on the price dimension and emphasizing on the product match dimension. And this trade-off is a recurring one in other more sophisticated model like Armstrong and Joe and the paper Andrew talked about last week. According to our theoretical prediction, if the platform is using seller-aligned fee instrument, then it may underemphasize on the price dimension. To illustrate this, let's consider eBay search interface redesign in 2011. During then, eBay was essentially choosing between two possible designs. One is called best match algorithm, which emphasizes on product match. The other is called two-stage algorithm, which emphasizes on price. Eventually, eBay ended up with the first design, which emphasized on the product match. And one possible explanation to this is that eBay uses proportional fee, which according to our categorization is seller aligned. So things are again consistent with the theoretical prediction. Okay, for the last part, I will talk about the literature. So early study of the literature of platform focuses on the pricing aspect. This paper contributes to the more recent literature that talks about non-price platform design issues. I tend to think that there are two main subsets in this literature. The first subset talk about non-marketplace setting or design that does not affect competition between sellers. For example, John and Rocher here talks about quality control by academic journal. My paper is closely related to the subset that talks about marketplace setting, but with the papers in this literature mostly focus on specific fee instruments. For example, they talk about number of sellers, they talk about information recommendation design, they talk about search targeting and search friction. So specific design issue and specific fee instruments. Relative to that, the main novelties of this paper is, first, I synthesizes multiple design issues with a unified framework. In particular, this formulation based on value and markup is quite flexible and is able to nest some existing insights as special cases. The second novelty is that the main result shows how the types of fee instruments of the platform shapes its incentive in governance design. And this is very important because it suggests that welfare results from platform models could be sensitive to the assumptions of fee instruments available. And this is important because then one must be cautious when trying to use theoretical prediction to make inference about real-world market if in practice the fee instrument used is different from what the model assumes. So let me quickly conclude. We know that platforms, especially the dominant one, play increasingly prominent governance or rule-setting roles. And from a policy perspective, it is important to understand their incentive. In this paper, I provide a framework to understand platforms' incentive across a class of governance design issues. And the main result shows that the sign of distortion is closely related to the fee instruments or business model of the platform. So if we want to regulate platforms, then it's important to distinguish different business model of digital platforms. Not all platforms are the same, so the appropriate policy response has to be tailored accordingly. And that's all from me. Thank you for your attention and thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you, Tat-How. And now we let Tianle to discuss the paper.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, thank you, Chen Si, for inviting me to discuss this paper. I really enjoy reading this paper. Actually, I think this is the second time I read this paper. So I previously do some literature review. I think I've come through this Tat-How's paper. Okay. So let me briefly recap the paper. So this paper is about this platform economy, I think, which is become increasingly popular, especially under the current COVID-19. So I think like Amazon, so eBay, I think there's some other platforms. So say Airbnb, right? So one natural question is that, so how do platforms, so they will choose their governance designs? So this is a very important. So I think that will help understand so how platforms make decisions and whether they will be aligned with the social incentives. Okay. This paper developed a framework to study this kind of the trade-offs faced by this platform, and also its welfare implications, and to the entire marketplace, so including sellers, consumers, and the platform. So here's the elements. So the first, the platform will choose its design, which is A, and then we determine two things. So the value to consumers here, and also the seller's markup. Right? So it's assumed that the markup so it's increasing function of A. And then the paper, I think, kind of assume that this is a reduced form equilibrium price. Okay? So it takes a very simple form. So just the C plus the M. So although this is very simple, but actually this is consistent with several models, I think popular models in the IO literature, such as the circular city model, the spokes model, Walensky's search model, and also the recent price-directed search models. Okay. I think this is a really nice reduced form. I think allows the author to kind of discuss other issues. Okay. And the surplus for the buyers in this case, so V is the value for the expected value to consumers. Then it's next the price, and it's D is I think the cost for consumer to participate in the platform. Okay. The platform collects fees. So I think the paper focuses on two types of fees: per transaction fees and also the proportional fees. Okay. So the market is fully covered. So therefore, the transactions, so it's really depend on the number of consumers participate in this platform, which is Q. As this is very simple. And then depending on whether this is a proportional fees or unit fees, so this fees equilibrium price can be written as a function of this C and this fees and also this markup. I think in the version I received from Tat-How, I think probably you have a new version now. So I think that you kind of discuss that the platform actually is equivalent choose its markup. Since I think here A will determines uniquely determines M, okay? And so therefore it's equivalent for the platform to choose its markup. I personally think that is more convenience than you just use A, but probably you have some other reason to switch back to this governance.
Just for the presentation purpose, so I don't want to. I want to avoid introducing.
Yeah, I think for the paper, I think it's much. It's more convenient to use M instead. Anyway, so for the per transaction fees, the platform just maximize this expression, and while the social planners problem is different. So the main result from this section is that the markup chosen by the platform is lower than the one chosen by the social planner. I think the intuition is quite straightforward. If you look at a platform's profit maximizing problem, so it's only cares about the quantity, so the transaction volumes, right? But while the social planners care also both about the markups here, the quantity transacted, and so that's for So therefore, here it's straightforward to see that the platform, the one chosen by the platform is lower than the one chosen by the social planner, right? Because social planner also care about how much the seller will earn from these transactions. Okay. So when we come to the proportional fees, so I think this problem become clear. The platform now cares both and its transaction volumes as well as its markup, right? So this is kind of in line with the social planner's problem, right? So whether the equilibrium or the one chosen by the platform compared to the markup chosen by the social planner, so which one is higher depending on two parameters, C, and also I think in demand elasticity, I think which is Q, I think in captured by Q, right? So here the intuition is that so under the proportional fees, so the platform actually care both the volume transactions here and the seller's surplus. Okay, so now he needs to kind of balance these two different income, two different resources. Okay, so in contrast to the previous case, in this per transaction fees, the platform cares only about the quantity. Okay. So if you think about if for the higher marginal cost, or if the demand is more elastic, okay, so it seems that then the platform will kind of bias and towards the volume transactions, because here it pays actually little weight on this platforms, on this seller's surplus. Okay. I think this is kind of a very nice also other the main results here in this section. So in the paper, I think Tat-How has done a lot of things, including so extend this to endogenous platform fees. I think the idea is basically the same with this exogenous platform fees, but just with more tedious calculations. I think I have some also need to impose some additional conditions to make sure the results will go through. Also, the paper discuss other types of instruments and a lot of things. I think also the idea has been pushed and to forward to two kind of one step forward to two kinds of fee instruments. Okay? So whether this fee instruments is more like a volume aligned, right? So meaning that this is the platform is more like to increase the transaction volumes, so that's to intensify the sales competition. So in this case, the markup chosen by the platform is lower than the one that is social desirable. Right? But while the other type of fees is the seller aligned fee instrument, so which is also cares about the seller's surplus. Okay? So therefore, you relax the seller competition. In this case, it's likely that the equilibrium markup will be higher than the one social optimal. Right? I think this is in line with the two propositions in the previous slides. Right? So overall, I think this is a very nice paper, a very simple framework. In fact, so you only capture by a very few parameters. Right? I think the insight, I think it's very nice. So we at least improve our understanding of how these platforms may strategically choose their governance designs. Right? So if you read the paper, I found this is a very rigorous analysis, and also there's a extensive and comprehensive discussion in the paper. Right? So I do have many questions when I read the paper, but I think most of these questions has been answered in the paper. Right? So I think it's already very comprehensive discussions. I think probably you have already thought about a lot of things since I think this is a revised resubmit paper, right? So I probably think about a lot of other questions. Okay? So here I think the bad thing here is you leave a little room for the discussions to discuss the paper. I think most questions being already addressed, right? So I have a little bit comments, right? So one question I think is mentioned as Novia, I think in the previously. So if the market is not exposed cover, I think for example, if you think about consumer search models as in Armstrong, Vickers, and Joe, So we have a finite number of firms, N firms, and then we have consumers coming to the platform. So after they search all these firms, sellers, if they do not find a desirable products, okay, so they might probably just, I think in their paper, they'll just left the market. Okay? So in that sense, I think it's quite also typical standard settings in some sense. So I think just wondering what happens if the market is not fully covered. But I think you have already explained that basically it's you got not really it's hard to get results. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. The second question here, I think in the proposition 2, so this equilibrium markup compared to the social optimal markup will depend on this condition, right? I'm wondering whether this condition can be boiled down to, say, something like the C, whether it's above or below some critical values. I think because I think you have already shown some results, that is at least in the lemma 2 thing in the appendix. So this MP is decreases in C. So it seems to me that I think you were able to show that C is kind of below some critical values. Then you have some results. I think as you discussed in the paper, I think can that be done? I think that would be very nice. So finally, I think here is if suppose we are given a fee instruments like proportional fees, right? So I wonder, so how this welfare change with this governance designs, right? So I think you have mainly focused on comparing the platform design with the one maximizes the welfare. I think you discussed a little, so how this governance design with changes affects the welfare. I think this is kind of important because you think about the takeaway message, so how we can regulate the platforms. So I think one question for the regulator is, so whether I should kind of impose some regulation so that maybe reduce the number of sellers in the platforms. I think we have something to do. I think certainly it's really hard to achieve the first best or second best. I think we want to now not to know if we kind of tighten up these government designs. So whether they will be beneficial to the society as a whole. I think probably you have some discussion in the paper, but I think whether you have more details on this. So suppose now if we want to have an increase in A, so how would that change the welfare? I think that's something I would like to know for that. Okay. I think overall it's a very nice paper. I think I just enjoy reading it. Yeah, thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much, Tianle. Let's now move to the Q&A session. So anyone who has a question, or maybe Tao, do you want to reply anything to the discussion?
I think I can reply to some of Tianle's comment.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, as you mentioned, the case of non-exposed cover market, then that case is quite difficult to do. I try to do that. So in that case, what happens is currently we have this queue function, which is like the mass of participants. So when you have a non-exposed cover, you will have another component that basically says how much of the people who participate eventually buy. So there will be a new component to the demand function. So so in that case, we don't really have a nice general characterization because things are going to heavily depends on the interaction between this participation component and the eventual purchase component. So yeah, but that's certainly I'm looking to do. So thank you so much for this very spot on comment. And regarding the comment on the cost, so under certain conditions, so if V is concave or if V is monotone, then we can indeed get a very nice cutoff. So we need extra conditions there. And regarding the comment on welfare, so if I'm understanding correctly, then you are mentioning that starting from the profit maximizing level, does the welfare decrease or increase when we push the platform to slightly changes its design, right? So I think that's a very good comment. So I never actually thought about framing things that way. So I guess I can add discussion on that. So I think it's a very nice way to frame the welfare discussion. So thank you so much.
All right. Now let's open the floor for Q&As. So anyone who has questions, please just unmute yourself and ask directly.
Tat-How, in your paper, you construct a model to study the optimal fee structure. Does you compare just membership fee, transaction fee, proportional fee, or two-part tariff, or you found your optimal fee among all feasible fee structure?
So you are mentioning, if I'm understanding correctly, you are mentioning the part where I endogenize the choice of fee instrument?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in that case, I show that if we endogenize the choice of fee instrument, and if we don't consider any sort of institutional constraint, then some form of two-part tariff is going to be optimal among all the fee instruments I have analyzed.
Oh, yes, nice.
Okay.
So I think, yeah. So going back to the earlier comments I had. So I think if you have the right, so yeah, okay. So here, because you are assuming exogenous, not exogenous, fixed markup, right? So fixed markup independent of fees. So that is why actually when you have proportional fees, so you can just use your platform design to maximize the transaction volumes. However, you do not have sort of full surplus extraction by the platform. So imagine a model where the fee is if the fee increases, the markup actually decreases. So basically, you can squeeze the firm's margin. Then if your fee is very high, actually the margin will go to zero. So in that kind of setting, then you, on the one hand, you can still maximize your platforms. The transaction volumes by choosing the platform design. On the other hand, you can just push up your fee to squeeze the margin to zero, and then you got a full surplus extraction. And also in that case, then other fees will not be. You do not need to consider other fees because this one is already capturing the maximum possible surplus. So it's potentially this is even better than any other type of fees. So yeah, that's just a thought, because we recently done something in this direction that sort of we had the same result, that you have when you have transaction fee, you have to maximize the total transaction volumes, but instead we have a variable markup. So yeah, I think that's the difference. So, but I think yours is interesting in the sense that you can also compare to other fees, because it's not full surplus extraction.
Yes, I think that's certainly a nice direction to look into. Yeah, the effect of the fee on the markup.
Right.
Yes.
And also for the, so for this, while you have transaction fee, the platform will maximize the total number of transactions. Is that a sort of common result in the literature, or this is depending on some kind of feature of the setting?
It actually comes from the so if it is exogenous fee, then it is fairly straightforward because you only have the demand function to maximize. If it is endogenous per transaction fee, then it comes from the log concavity of the demand function, whereby you have a incomplete pass-through. So in that case, you are trying to maximize you use the envelope theorem and you try to maximize the component inside the demand function. So yeah, so I think that one is fairly general.
Okay.
It comes from the envelope theorem and some form of incomplete pass-through.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions?
So just a comment, Tat-How. So I'm thinking about, so if you, now you are kind of doing the analysis by this per transaction fees and then versus the proportional fees, right? But I think your idea actually can go further. I think just you summarize in the table. So I think it's more considering like this volume aligned fee instrument versus this seller aligned fee instrument. I think if you kind of starting the paper with that or position your paper with that angle, I think probably it's kind of more general to the audience, to the readers. So I think now it seems to me that you are kind of considering this per transaction fees and versus the proportional fees, and then you extend your results. But actually, if you go the other way around, let's say you discuss in general, the platform can actually have two kind of instruments. One is aligned with its volumes. The other is aligned with the seller surplus. Then you give some examples. I think that seems more. The paper is more broad than the current. But I think probably it's not worth doing it now. I think since it's already in the R&R stage. Right?
But I think I can try to. I think it's a good way to frame the introduction.
Yeah. And
so,
also, I think you probably have kind of the paper as I read, I left an impression that you kind of relying on this monotonic relationship between V and M. But I think in fact no, right? So you allow in general. I think kind of when I read this through, because all these examples and all the discussions you're having, I think it's kind of discuss the special cases. But I think it's kind of leave at least on me, I think some impression. Oh, so probably this will depend on this very specific relationship. But I think actually it's no. We probably want to kind of emphasize a little bit in the paper on that. Yeah.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. Thank you.
So we still have time for questions. So if you have questions, please just unmute yourself and ask Tat-How directly. Okay, have you, so I think last time, no, I think, so you also, so I think it's true that, so that basically your model also captures the version of Olinsky with infinite number of sellers, like the one we did in the other one, the short one. So in that paper we consider some other sort of vertical restraints, right? Like a price parity. So it's a vertical restraint. So have you thought of like how this more general model, because your model captures not only the cost search cost reduction, you can also do other things. Have you considered combining this with other types of vertical restraints?
Okay, so I would say that I'm a bit cautious here, because for those kind of vertical constraint, I thought about that. Then I think that's pushing the limit of the model a bit too much, because that will require you to have an outside channel. So like price parity clause you mentioned. So currently I don't really explicitly model the outside channel and seller pricing on that. So the entire focus is only on the on-platform competition. So modeling vertical restraints will require the model to take into account outside channels through which buyers and sellers can interact. So
how about those vertical restraints which does not require an external channel? Like for example, if you have finite number sellers, you probably can consider something like a RPM or something.
RPM.
Or you have a service component, or the seller. I mean, the seller maybe have some other dimensions. I don't know, like effort or whatever. So a vertical relationship between the platforms and the sellers who sell on the platform without the external channel.
I guess it really depends on how the, say, vertical restraints works. So for example, let's say the vertical restraint is a contract specifying some sort of minimum quality requirement, then that will be equivalent to quality control. For RPM, then it would be more tricky because it directly influences the price. So they were more like a contract that directly specify the price the sellers should set. So I don't think the current way I frame the design would capture that. Yeah, so it really depends on what kind of vertical restraints we are talking about.
Right. And I guess also, even when you have a external channel, but the sellers are local monopolists or something, that kind of very simplified version of external channel, maybe the model is still tractable.
Yeah. As long as they can price discriminate across the.
Yeah. Okay. So as long as they can price discriminate.
Yeah.
All right. So we still have 1 minute. If you have questions, it's a last chance to ask.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about being late because
I
have a difficulty connecting my computer to internet.
Right.
It was a really old laptop.
Yeah. No worries. Okay. So given there's no questions, I'm going to close the session. Let's thank again Tat-How and Tianle for the presentation and discussion.
Thank you for your attention.
So we still have one. I think we still have one presentation before the Christmas, so next week. So I hope that you can come back to join us. Okay. So thank you for coming. Yep. Thank you, Tat-How.
Thank you.